Good evening from our headquarters in Kiev. This is the Sunday show at Hromadske International, the only prime-time discussion in English explaining Eastern European geopolitical storm. And I'm Natalia Humenyuk. So we have 1 week before crucial presidential election in Ukraine, the first round. And we have a number of front runners and an extraordinary panel in our studio to discuss and give you understanding what's going on, what is the mood in Ukraine. So I'll introduce our guest. That is Paul Nyland, who is a Kiev-based writer, founder of Statement Email, Bogdan Nahailo, British journalist, historian and long-time Ukraine watcher, Dirk Lustig, who is also a political expert and activist and watching the Ukrainian politics closely, being here on the ground, and Yevhen Fedchenko, director at the Kiev Mohyla School of Journalism and co-founder of Stop Fake organization. So probably great to have you. It's really extraordinary. I think that's an incredible amount of different point of views. But we would start from the ratings to represent to our foreign audience that the rating of Ukrainian presidential candidates at this point, according to one of the research groups, which is independent rating, they are more or less similar, is the following. We can have that Volodymyr Zelensky, a comedian, has up to 25%. Yulia Tymoshenko, the head of former prime minister, 18%. Petro Poroshenko, current president, 16%. And Anatoly Lutsenko, 10%, former minister of defense. The representative of pro-Russian, openly pro-Russian, not anymore opposition bloc, but a party, up to 10%. And a famous populist, I can't name him differently, Oleg Lyashko, is 6%. These are the data among those who are planning to vote and are decided according to the sociological group rating. The margin of error is no more than 2%. So probably if we would like to address and explain to the audience what's going on, what are the most crucial things, what are the most crucial debates, maybe Yevhen, you will start.
Yeah, so I am kind of a watcher of Ukrainian elections, both trying to look at the domestic reactions, but also following Russian disinformation and some kind of bias coming from the Western media and Western experts. So my take would be that we really need to be very, very cautious about ratings and polls per se, because they are reflecting those things which people are asked about. So the answer would directly depend on what exactly is your question? What are you asking? And so there are a lot of different polls coming from respectable institutions, Ukrainian and foreign institutions. So of course they give you some idea what's going on and who is kind of the leading players. But it's very difficult to make any projections into the future results because all other Ukrainian elections gave us a lot of examples when polls were not reflecting the real nature of a struggle during the elections per se. And that's why I would not use them as a kind of instrument that gives us the idea of the future, what's going to happen 100%. Of course, we see the front runners, but then we have still the whole week coming. And if we talk about, for example, Zelensky as the front runner, for me, this poll is a reflection of his recognition as a face, as a brand, and I would not be so sure that all those people, like 25% who said that they are supporting him, they're exactly supporting him, because it's about the views, about his political platform as well, and when people would go to vote, they would be looking at this from very, very different perspective.
Can I say something there? But the point that you made, that it's the way that the question is framed, the way that the question is asked, right? That plays a lot into the kind of answers that we're seeing and the kind of ratings that we're seeing. But the other thing that's important as well is that people have to consider that they shouldn't just answer what they want to happen, but they also have to bear in mind what they think will happen. And this gets sharper and sharper as people get closer to the actual election day, right? So you might be saying 2 weeks out, whenever this poll was taken, we're now 1 week out, you might be saying that you want a change candidate, but when it comes to going inside the booth and putting a tick next to a name, you might do something more pragmatic, something more stable.
Would you share this concern? Because the ratings are really more or less the same. And of course, the ratings of the polls of the President Poroshenko are growing. Still, kind of, his disappointment about him are pretty strong in the Ukrainian society.
Well, I think that we have to take the polls seriously. I don't dismiss them, because there is a great degree of consistency. Whether one is pro-Tymoshenko, pro-Zelensky, or pro-president, the differences are not that great, 2 or 3%. I mean, the big battle has been between Poroshenko and Tymoshenko. Will Poroshenko overtake Tymoshenko? Will Tymoshenko catch up? Who will get into round 2? I think as things stand, unless there's going to be some, deus ex machina that we don't know, which could go either way, I think we should expect a newcomer to the political scene, Zelensky, to be in the second round, and a very close run battle going on between Poroshenko and his political rival, Tymoshenko. The others are quite far behind. I mean, Lutsenko was making brave efforts. He was in Lviv yesterday trying to rally with his coalition of partners supporting his position, a Democratic Alliance. But they are polling about 10%, which is not 25 or 24 or even 17. So I think at the end of the day, I would put my money on relying more or less on what the polls are telling us and concentrating on that and not speculating too much.
I agree with this. I really think that we see that many people are tired with the political elite in this country because they have been deceived, and the people were waiting for this outsider to jump in the race. Me personally, I would have loved that this outsider would have been Slava Vakarchuk, but it is Zelensky. Why I'm sure that Zelensky is a protest vote, it is because we have now daily some scandals around all of the candidates, and the only person who is not affected by any scandals seems to be Zelensky, because a lot of stories have been made up against him, but his percentages are growing. So this shows a clear protest vote, and I think the message I would like to give to the people in general in Ukraine is that still vote with your brain, because when you vote for the protest vote, other countries have shown this, you don't harm the elite, the oligarchs, Poroshenko or Tymoshenko. You harm yourself, because you will need to live then for 5 years with this choice. So a protest vote might be good, but think first about the result of your protest vote, because you harm yourself.
Right. Well, I would say that Zelensky represents a total surprise and a refreshing factor in Ukrainian politics. He was a joker in the pact, probably to disrupt the whole process, to come third or fourth, to take votes away from others. In fact, he's emerged as the front runner. Is this good or bad? I think that it is not very serious to dismiss him simply as a clown. Clearly, he's a very intelligent character, self-made man with backing. He has, as I found out, a legal degree as well, or a legal thing. So he's not just an actor or a clown. He has a lawyer's background. And I think what's also important is we have to factor in that he's taking votes away from the former Regents people. He is appealing mainly to the South and East, to Russophones. The question was, is he sufficiently patriotic? Does he sufficiently identify with Ukraine? Will he support the Ukrainian language, etc.? And what we've seen in the last week, which has been encouraging for me, is as he's finished his new series of Servant of the People, he's now appearing almost on a daily basis, answering these tough questions. And so far, I think he's reassuring those who want to listen, because a lot of those who have his detractors simply have switched off and just dismiss him. But my other very important point is that we cannot simply demonize the character. Whether we like him or not, if we alienate him, he becomes president, and 10 or 15 or 20% of the country says we don't want to have anything to do with him, he's not our type of man. What kind of president will he be? He is supposed to represent the unity of the country.
Yeah, but the only problem is that I would not consider him to be the part of the Ukrainian politics, because he's actually the part of show business. And that provides him the great leverage over politicians, because he is on TV every day.
But others are part of business. Are they politics or are they businessmen and oligarchs?
Political commitments. So he can just show up on TV every time, and that's enough for people to
An oligarch can pay for his party or his newspaper or his TV channel to project the message for him.
But, you know, Ukrainian political system is not about the political loyalty, so it's very, very issue-oriented, and people usually vote on ad hoc basis. So
but
he
here
does
they're
not
voting for
represent
images, and the images of a crusading reformer, whether he is or not, but that program, Servant of the People, which is hard-hitting, and it's something that the political culture and level of awareness is needed here for people to think about the issues. The way it's done, you could say it's cynically done, there are, puppet masters, but it's actually reached a large audience.
There you go. And there you go. That is, you talk about the puppet master, and Dirk has just said that there are not these scandals coming out all the time about Zelensky. One of the main objections to him that I'm reading is that he's very much perceived to be a candidate that is supported by the oligarch Igor Kolomoisky. Right? We know who Kolomoisky is. We know the kind of businesses that he has had in the past, including Privat and the
But we know who Poroshenko and Akhmetov are and Firtash are.
Yes, that's true.
Why don't we apply the same argument to Kolomoisky? Kolomoisky was the only oligarch that stood up and defended eastern Ukraine with his money, not just his mouth, when the president was meeting with Firtash and Klitschko in Vienna, and keeping Yuriy out, according to Firtash's statement in court. So let's be honest, I think there's double standards.
It's not only the question who is behind, but it's also the question of the kind of a personality of those who is running. So far we haven't seen Zelensky answering any serious questions about his future politics and other things.
In the last week.
No,
he met a top bunch of journalists.
He's escaping any, basically, personal meetings with media, and what we already had was pre-recorded.
Have a look on, I just watched before I came. He was interviewed by leading Western journalists, including our friend Peter, who asked him about the East, Donbass, about the Ukrainian language, about what to do about the economy. He did a fairly good job, I would say, in that
fairly good job, because we still didn't get many answers.
Which other candidate has done that? Has the president done that? Does he meet freely with journalists and tackle hard-hitting questions? Does Yulia? Does Lutsenko? Maybe he does. I think he's doing that.
I still should add that for independent media, it's very hard to reach Vladimir Zelensky. We see the video, of course, which is important to mention. We just seen it on our screens. The meeting of Zelensky with some of the politicians, and yes, it's new that some people like Aivaras Abramowitsch, who's former economy minister, former finance minister, Daniluk, and MP Lutsenko had kind of went into
He blew the whistle, and he was forced to resign. He didn't resign. I mean, he blew the whistle on the fact that funds were being diverted from the state to fund the elections for the president, and he was forced to resign. I mean, an honest man and a capable economist.
And the other name, sorry, that Natalka just mentioned was Aivaras, the former economy and trade minister, who, I think if there's something that you're looking for a positive sign, the fact that Zelensky has managed to attract around him people like that. You just mentioned Daniluk and the reason why he resigned. The reason why Abramowitsch just resigned was that he was getting pressure to appoint various political insiders to take management posts in state-owned enterprises.
Clearly, the team that he selects, because we only just have the tip of the iceberg, who he selects for foreign policy, defense policy.
We don't know.
We don't know, because he says he'll do it in the second round.
We don't know it for many other politicians, except maybe Lutsenko, who clearly announced his team.
Yes. We know maybe Poroshenko team. It's more or less the same,
Unfortunately. We don't know. Who's going to be the procurator? Who's going to be the Minister of Defense? We know that Nemiria will probably be foreign minister.
Are you speaking about the Tymoshenko?
So I think it is too simple to like a lot of camps are trying to do to put Zelensky. He's a clown, or he's an actor. We should not forget that he created a business empire with his 95. Kvartal. That is a multi-million dollar or euro business. So positive about him is that he really seems to listen. It's also something that maybe the current president is totally missing. He is listening to people like Daniluk, to our friend from the Baltics.
But on the flip side, if I may, I mean, you're saying that potentially he's a decent candidate because he built his business, multi-million-dollar business, etc., etc. But some months ago, he started crowdsourcing his policies. He asked people, rather than him coming up himself with a manifesto, he asked people to go to his Facebook page and to suggest policies that they might follow.
Because
That's not leadership.
Exactly what Macron did in France.
Exactly.
Isn't it exactly?
He built his campaign on getting people to inject their ideas.
Yeah, but at least Macron didn't say that he would be picking up members of his cabinet on Facebook as well, because this is nonsense.
Macron said, give me the ideas and I will select my people accordingly. He had 2 or 3 key people that were his friends, like he has.
Had a position in the government previously compared to Zelensky. So still, one of the biggest questions about him, if you already kind of come to this stage, is about his position in Russia. And opportunity, which is clearly criticized by many, opportunity about the negotiation with Russia. So what you would say on that? And obviously for a lot of people, this is the main question. How do you have a comedian talking to Vladimir Putin?
Why is he a comedian?
Because
let's get away from this fake news. This is a typical fake news.
This is his profession.
It's his profession. I told you, he's a lawyer by background. He's an intelligent guy. We don't say the chocolate baron, do we? We don't say so
but that's exactly how journalists often put it.
I should probably dismiss the fact that why he doesn't really say that he's not a comedian. He's kind of major of his time. He's running the comedian series. He's running the comedian show. He's proud, and he's proud of this. So it's like an actor, okay, a comedian actor, which is not a negative.
If he's been appearing in a show where he's playing a president, campaign reforming for an overhaul of the system. Obviously, he's picked up something even from the lines that he's had to learn. He's not a total newcomer. He's had to think about these issues. You know, what is wrong with this country? Why is there this corruption?
It would be the same as to offer Frank Underwood running for U.S. presidency, for example, or Bartlett for U.S. president. I saw some people put in, on bumper stickers like Bartlett for U.S. president, but that would be very, very far from reality.
May I remind you, Natalka's question was, how is Zelensky going to negotiate with Putin?
We don't know that because he doesn't have any substantial policy issues.
Nobody can negotiate.
Still, there are negotiations with Putin. Still, it's happening rare, but there is the formal Geneva format, Minsk format. Once in a while, half a year.
Format.
Yeah, once in a year, the President Poroshenko talks to Merkel and Macron, and they kind of talk to Putin. So it's not totally existing, and I think that's something which would happen. So, what are your ideas about particularly the war in this case? Because the anti-corruption sentiment is more or less clear. People are against the corruption. They would stand for that. The concern is, where is the war?
I think all of the candidates want to stop the war. It's a question of presenting it. So to continue, because we don't know who is Zelensky, I think it is very, very sad that we didn't have any presidential debate, like in so many countries. It's happening where you have the top 6, 7 candidates who really have a clear debate. Now there's a big push now from the Poroshenko team, because mentally they already hope that they will do the second tour. So they want now the debate Poroshenko-Zelensky apparently for the second tour. So they are pushed this week for the debate. But debate should have been done before the first tour, because then you see who is who. This is first thing. To finish quickly with Zelensky, it is not, again, I think it's too simple to say the actors, the clowns, everything. I'm not a fan of Zelensky, but I think it is too simple. He's a businessman. He somehow is a genius, because if everybody else is spending millions and millions on election, he is earning money on election. Because of his serial Sluga Naroda, he sold it. So while other people
spending his own money, that's a problem.
You don't know.
Well, he's made the money, and if you look ahead, remember that he has the new series coming out on the 27th, just on the very eve. I've taken a peek view of that because they've given 10 minutes of it. It's very heavy on the war. He's at the graves of the fallen soldiers. He emphasizes that he himself is from Kryvyi Rih, where there are many graves without the contents because the bodies haven't been returned. He's playing up the patriotic note in the last week or two, or in between the two things. So we can expect that from him. I don't think he has any quick fixes. Obviously, no one has with the war. But what he's saying is, I'm willing to talk if my partners, not out of context as a maverick, if my partners in a Budapest format support me on that. And he's very fixed now on the Volker approach of having, that's his latest thing in the last 2 or 3 days, that, to bring in the peacekeepers, UN blue helmets, first on the line of contact, and then get them to move into Lugansk and Donetsk, and finally to the border, which has been simplified by our media, some of the media, to say that he already wants to just stop there. You know, which is, I'm appealing to Yevhen, because he does such a great job in fighting fake news coming from Russia, but we've seen very little effort to fight fake news internally from all sides. You know, which says something about the low level of political culture still.
If I can just add to that, I'm also really trying to sort out real news from fake news, but it's really very, very dangerous to kind of do not see the border between TV reality or reality created on TV by some personage and what is happening in the real life. Because for many, many Ukrainians, this line is very blurred and they confuse more and more reality and TV performance. And for me, I don't see any problem in Zelensky per se, but I see exactly the problem over here, that people are confusing his personality on TV with his personality as a real person. So this is very dangerous because it's delusional.
But don't you think that all politics, and especially in this country, is about smoke and mirrors? The president makes his decision late at night on Bankivska with his private meetings, and on show in Parliament, the pocket parties go through the motions of democracy. We don't know who Yulia is meeting with, whom she may be considering. It's all very murky. There's not a total, but there's a great lack of transparency in Ukrainian politics. We haven't opened up the system, so it's unfair to just accuse one candidate. Let's be, just and accuse them all of not putting their cards on the table.
I probably would jump in that, because we would still talk about Zelensky, probably with the message, for instance, answering. There was a highly, let's say, debated article from the American Interest written by Diane Francis on Volodymyr Zelensky is Ukraine's anti-Trump. I give a bit of the quote that, but Zelensky is not a clown, nor is he the Slavic version of Donald Trump.
And he's not a clone.
He is a lawyer who has made millions as a producer and performer with theatrical production and a hit television series called Servant of the People, now at Netflix. What I think it may be interesting to explain to the foreign audience, that somehow it's really not that much about anti-Trump, because Trump is playing very much, let's say, politics of the minorities, very kind of anti-liberal, which Zelensky is here trying to play this middle ground person who is appealing to, who is very moderate in national politics, in media, in kind of being appealing for eastern and southern people, in particular in Donetsk and Crimea. He's
avoided the answer. They asked him to define himself, the journalist. Who are you, liberal, conservative, whatever? He said, well, I stand for a wealthy and affluent Ukrainian, which is obviously, a very vague.
Probably, for me, this article was very symptomatic, not even because those scenes were mentioned over there, because it was mentioned in many other places before, but this really gives the idea how the situation in Ukraine is perceived from outside of Ukraine. And it's described usually in a very kind of generalistic terms. And that is not fair, because Ukrainian elections are quite interesting this time. And it doesn't make much sense to approach Ukrainian elections with very kind of generic scenes which usually are brought up during any election.
That's
so basically,
a really good point, sorry, that Ukrainian elections are very, very interesting at this time, because I mean, we're here discussing the merits of the candidates or the demerits of whoever, but the really key thing that people should understand internationally about what is happening right now in Ukraine is that democracy is alive and well.
Absolutely.
We are having a fabulous discussion, not just now in this studio, but nationally we're having a great discussion about the candidates and the policies. And we have no idea who's going to win. We have no idea, right?
Absolutely. But what is happening actually?
I would say, I think you're far too generous. I think democracy is alive, but it's not entirely well. It has a lot of shortcomings, a lot of failings, and things that need to be put right. The lack of openness is one thing. The lack of real parties parties with ideologies.
the short
Okay, but that was happening everywhere in the world now.
To different degrees. But you actually touched on earlier on what is one of the key problems with politics here is that what are they? Are they politicians or businessmen? That was what you said. And they are politicians in order to be businessmen, right? That kind of conflict of interest is the kind of thing that Poroshenko has not been able to eradicate in the last 5 years.
I would like to ask, in particular, went into this discussion because still many people, when you ask them who would win, it's not about the ratings, about whom would you vote for, but who do you think would win? Consider that Poroshenko will win, which is kind of dubiosity, that there is this difference.
Before we get to that, can I just interject one thing, which is, I think is crucial if we're talking about democracy, and nobody talks about it. The big thing that was spoken about after the Maidan and the Revolution of Dignity was the rejuvenation of civil society, control from the public. Who of the candidates is talking about civil society keeping tabs on the promises that are being made now?
I totally disagree with that because in Ukraine, civil society is playing an absolutely crucial role. It's booming, and you cannot imagine what is not done.
But who of the candidates, excuse me, Yevhen, show me one of the candidates that is taking civil society seriously.
Everybody is taking.
Most of them
you just cannot
either don't mention it or see it as a nuisance factor.
Partly Lutsenko, most
Lutsenko, perhaps.
But
which I think is also a failure of where we're at in evolving democratic process.
I cannot imagine any single field in Ukraine which is not controlled by civil society now. Starting from media to judicial reform to anti-corruption campaign to finances to parliamentary.
They are there, but they don't have the clout to push through, to follow through. Look at legal reform.
The only way to push through reform is going
We got stuck halfway.
No.
Good intentions.
I would get into this in particular about the position of President Poroshenko, who started his career as a president being very pro-Western, very pro-supportive in civil society. Later we saw that there was a huge, let's say, fight between a number of the people in the civil society and the president.
And the creditors and those setting conditionality.
So I'm giving you an example from this week, which I would like we touch a bit, because there was a pretty scandalous quote given by the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, Yuriy Lutsenko, this week while traveling to the US. He said the following to the Hill magazine. Unfortunately, from the first meeting with the US ambassador in Kiev, Marie Yovanovitch, gave me a list of people whom we should not prosecute. My response of that is inadmissible. Nobody in this country, neither our president, nor our parliament, nor our ambassador, will stop me from prosecuting whether there is a crime. Later, the American embassy totally denied these allegations, as later it taken a couple of days for the President Poroshenko to react, to say that I would like to note the important role of the United States ambassador to Ukraine. Marie Yovanovitch is promoting Ukrainian-American relations. I emphasize she is a representative of the United States as a state and the President of the United States, Donald Trump, Ukraine's great friend, and my friend has my full support. Besides that, I would shortly mention the General Prosecutor also mentioned this case that, he would also open the case, had opened the case on the Ukraine's interference into the U.S. elections, in particular regarding the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, when the whole world is discussing Mueller investigation. How you really see in particularly, I would like to discuss the President Poroshenko, who still has a high chances to remain in power, his relations with the West, with the civil society, and in particular maybe shortly quote this situation in particularly, because that's pretty dubious.
I think this is a very embarrassing situation. I think Lutsenko not only shot himself in the foot, but he shot the country in the foot, and some nifty footwork, if you pardon the expression, had to salvage Ukraine's image, because that was a major faux pas and he spoke out of turn. But the fact is that the US and others, the EU, have not been happy for at least 2 years with the record of the present administration. And we've seen from the Poroshenko administration at the time, roughly when there was talk about finalizing the anti-corruption court, that there was this resentment of outside interference. But they forget that they are taking billions of credits, that this conditionality from the EU, from the World Bank, is absolutely legitimate. If the country wants to be bailed out, and partly because you're not running the country properly, economically and siphoning off things for your own pockets, the oligarchs, then please be civil and be grateful to your donors and creditors and not cause problems at this crucial stage.
Again,
how much do we have to pay this year? How many billions does Ukraine have to repay this year? 17 billion.
If I might disagree with this, because only if we would look at the number of Poroshenko's visit either to Washington, D.C. or to Brussels, that would be the highest level of accepting him as a peer in those negotiations. And all the main issues he was pushing, like EU free trade agreement and military aid from United States to Ukraine is increased all the time. And there is kind of a general international recognition of this. Again, if I might refer to the very recent podcast by CPAR, where Brian said absolutely great things, that we should consider Poroshenko as a war president and credit him for what he was doing, for one very simple reason, because having a war with Russia, he fought it at a draw, and this is a huge achievement for the country of the size.
The Ukrainian society don't give credit to one man.
It's not government credit, it's a credit to the kind of a leadership of the country.
And Paul, I would still ask you as well to comment on the fact, because there is a lot of criticism to the President Poroshenko, and his ratings show that it's the best kind of explanation to that he's very unpopular president.
90%.
However, some people would say that it's really unfair, it's not really appreciated, because still within these 4 years, many reforms had been done, and that was not exactly the case. Maybe Paul and Dirk, what would you have?
I'll happily respond to that. Yeah. I will happily respond to that. But just one point. If you go back to that Lutsenko quote that you had there, did he really say that he is not directed by anybody, including the president, as to who he should or should not prosecute?
Yes.
That's ridiculous, right? Yes. We know that the Prosecutor General's office is a political appointment here, and we know
a family relative of the president, without a legal background.
But to talk about Poroshenko and to talk about his record, okay, so we've had 5 years of his presidency, and to me, one of the greatest failures is that we have not had justice for the people who were killed on Maidan. One of his greatest failures is that, again, the Prosecutor General's office, they are instructed by Bankova who to investigate and who not to investigate. How many high-level officials from the Yanukovych era have been put in prison for corruption? And the answer is zero. And the reason why the answer is zero is because there is little desire, or within the political class for them to
I don't want to be kind of advocate of Poroshenko because I do not work for him, but as I am the only one who is kind of trying to get this conversation balanced, I would say that if we would demand from him to prosecute people, the drawback for that would be that would mean that he is in full control of judicial and law enforcement, and he is given personal instructions to them whom to prosecute. We've already been there.
It was in reality, you know he does.
He cannot tell to the courts how to prosecute people.
The requirement is for there to be sufficient evidence of there having been crimes committed.
Yeah, but we want the rule of law.
In the case of the Yanukovych era,
I would have a question. Sorry to say, I would interrupt saying, like, do you think that would be different under other candidates in this country? That would be my point. Whether there would be either Yuriy Tymoshenko or any other politicians who would make it in this country at this time. That's also the questions for many. And still, it's, to be very honest, we all spent a kind of couple of years to explaining to international audience the reforms of the Ukraine, which had been done largely thanks to civil society, but maybe not just thanks to the civil society.
Thanks to Western support and advisors too. Many of the reforms are coming right now.
Still, do you have, maybe you would say, I'll ask you maybe to put some balance on that. What would be still the legacy of Petro Poroshenko? I think there was a lot of controversy regarding the autocephaly, yet still it had happened, and it's pretty supportive. There is a.
I see him as somebody who would have been an excellent foreign minister. He's eloquent. He's very good when he talks abroad. He's been a disaster in communicating with his own people. I think the first 2 years he gets good marks because there seemed to be movement. There seemed to be a desire. But after that, the political will vanished, and the president will be remembered as somebody who became the broker, the balancer of interest between the oligarchs behind the scenes.
I totally agree with this. And the legacy of Poroshenko, I think Poroshenko got the fruits of the work of a lot of his predecessor and a lot of structures. So, I mean, when they say now, I signed the EU agreement, yeah, you signed the papers that Yanukovych refused to sign, but the paper was ready and the work was done. Visa-free, and even Thomas was started many years ago by absolutely. And under President Yushchenko.
Why did he leave it till just before the elections?
It was close to ready, just when you it is, again, I think Thomas is very good, but when you see which conditions at the end of the day Poroshenko agreed to, religion is also about money, and the deal that they signed at the end of the day with Constantinople is not that good for the Ukrainian church, because, for example, the church from North America, Canada, and the States, where there's money, goes directly under the management of Constantinople. So he pushed it through. Because of the election, we speak about a president who 2 years ago was still going to Lavra and Moskovska Patriarchat. We speak about a president who was the only one who at Easter didn't go and visit all of the churches, but just went to...
I would probably correct you at this point in particularly, because we had in this studio talking to a lot of people from the church, really saying that it was a particular moment in history where a lot of factors played out why it had happened exactly this time. And of course, this position of receiving autocephaly could be misused by the president. However, it's not exactly done before the elections. There is a reason for that. Still, maybe the last on Poroshenko, I would ask, aren't you, because one of the present campaign is that if not him, there could be things, they could be really worse. And there are a lot of people who are afraid to vote for the others. This is a pretty popular
line that he's putting across.
Line, but still a position. Yeah, so are you concerned? Yeah, are you concerned? Or maybe are you not?
I am not.
No, I have absolutely different perception of his legacy. And his main achievement would be keeping Ukraine alive within absolutely existential threat of physical non-existence if all those efforts would not be put together. So this is number one. Second, you mentioned different reforms which might be started earlier, but within Ukrainian politics, it's important not who starts something, but who finishes something, which happens very rarely. And if you can do something from the beginning to the very end and said, I've done this is quite a rarity within Ukrainian politics, with very few exceptions. So if he can say, yes, I finish the reform of the army and have an army ready, if I change the foreign policy, if I sign the EU free trade agreement, yes,
which wasn't of his making.
Absolutely. And if I did, for example, other reforms which were started probably earlier. If he brought Thomas, this is his achievement. Because
it's not his achievement.
Let us also listen.
It's not his achievement.
I would also let you and the audience listen to what Hromadske journalists talk to the people in the street to give you a bit of the feeling. We have a lot of that in the Ukrainian era, so please listen.
Має пообіцяти вам кандидат в президенти, щоб ви поставили за нього голос свій.
Вони все гарно розказують, тільки вірити їм не можна.
Те що для вас головне?
Подолати корупцію.
Мир. Медицинське обслуживання нормально.
Як ви будете голосувати на виборах?
Я не знаю, вон начальник мій.
Ну ви проголосуйте на виборах.
Обов'язково.
Що має пообіцяти президент? Зарплати, да чи ні?
Да.
Захист прав ЛГБТ.
А что это такое?
Який ваш ідеальний президент?
Не вижу, ничего не слышу.
А чего?
Ничего никому не скажу.
А что, из-за кого голосовать? Ну вот они как раз обещают, но, по-моему, ничего не выполняют.
Який ваш ідеальний президент?
Бойко. Ну, Тимошенко.
Хочу, чтобы машины были дешевые, первое. Дороги хорошие. Доллар дешевле. А хотя по 10. И еще, чтобы Зеленский был президентом. Ну, потому что он как бы новое лицо хотя бы.
Просто, щоб комфортно жилося.
Не особо вижу кандидатур достойных. Но я думаю, что Украина должна жить без войны, это самое главное.
And I also would encourage everybody to watch the full version of our reports, interviews, read the articles at Hromadske international webpage en.hromadske.ua. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Search Hromadske International and sign up for our weekly newsletter so you stay updated. I would ask, there is one person in this rating which had been leading in the polls for 1 year, Yulia Tymoshenko. She has according to all the data, she has a high chances to get into the second round and to win, but we don't talk about her. You know, like why it's interesting, why people don't believe she would win, though she's in a very good position.
Yeah, because we've been discussing different ideas behind. So behind Zelensky, there is some ideas
No,
that
I'm
he's a new
generally
face.
speaking, like, why
and if we talk
Tymoshenko-
about Poroshenko, but there is not many ideas behind her. So if someone would ask, what Yulia Tymoshenko is about, give me 3 main things about her.
She's professional, she's appealing to the people.
Yeah, I think Tymoshenko was the only candidate until recently, until Zelensky, like a meteorite sort of into the lead. She was the only candidate that I, as an observer, saw that was actually preparing seriously and trying to get a program across to the people. She was involving experts. She was calling large-scale meetings with experts, whether it was constitutional reform, economic reform, legal reform, etc. I was at one of them. I was impressed by the quality and the caliber of the people that were there. And at that time, Poroshenko wasn't saying anything about his program, about other than language, faith, and army. Zelensky was keeping quiet. The others were trying to see how to get in. So you have to give her credit. She has tried to remold and rebuild herself. I think she has a program. She is basing much on there being a constitutional referendum to take power away from the presidency and move it to the parliament with a chancellor type of person there. So I think the ideas are there. The fact is that most of the populism that she's been associated with has shrouded or overshadowed
Right. Yeah, but I think it is
rightly so.
No, why? You know, with Tymoshenko, for me, it's very funny because I speak also with a lot of people in diaspora and people here. When she presented her program and when she was on the first position in ratings, so many people said, no, everybody except Tymoshenko. I mean, why? Because she's bad. Because of what? No, look what she did. She did what? Even people like you, Paul, you wrote an article. Let me finish 1 second. You wrote an article, Tymoshenko, yeah.
And then
in the first article,
again, part 2, yeah.
In the first article you put, Tymoshenko doesn't have any plan, any program, no anything. So she's just talking in the air. Then she presents a program in all fields. She's the only candidate, now Lutsenko is doing the same, but she was the only candidate who clearly defined her economic policy, what she would do regarding Donbass. So she put things down on paper, not by herself, but with
she
group of
Just a second. Paul has a very skeptical face when he was listening about what Bogdan said about her. So, Paul,
well, first, yes. You just attributed something to me, saying that I wrote something in an article, and I've written 2 articles about Tymoshenko, and what you said I wrote, I didn't write. But anyway. So you asked a question before we went to the Vox Populi, and you said, are you afraid? Right? I will tell you right now that the one thing that I'm afraid of, the outcome of this presidential election that I'm most afraid of, is that Tymoshenko might win. Because I think she would be an absolute disaster for this country.
Why?
She's... Okay,
let Paul talk.
But I mean, take a look at the main advertising message that we saw in that period when she was leading the ratings, where she was talking about a new course for Ukraine. She's 20 years in Ukrainian politics. She has, as a result of those years that she has been in that pigsty feeding trough that we call the Verkhovna Rada, as a result of that, she made massive amounts of money, huge amounts of money with United Energy Systems. I was very much against her being politically imprisoned, right? Absolutely, that was wrong, that was unfair. But when she came to fill out her e-declaration, when we discussed this on another show, actually, the e-declarations, when she came to fill out her e-declaration, she basically claimed to be a pauper. That's not true. That's not true. She's fundamentally dishonest, and she's also, and I'll let you come back if you wish, because I hear you sighing, and she's also a populist. The second most popular message in her billboards is that she's going to cut gas prices in half, right? I'm sorry, but that's just not policy. That's populism. It's election buying.
Yeah.
I would agree with you and just add a quote, again referring to the same CPAR podcast I was already mentioning, when one of the participants, Melinda Herring, said that she's a great negotiator, and here we hear the great laugh coming from the anchor, because we all remember her negotiations about gas with Russia, for example. So this is a classical example of how we can present that.
Yep. She doesn't think she did anything wrong. She thinks that we got the
Stockholm Arbitration Court. The Stockholm Arbitration Court disagrees with you.
Let's be fair.
Yes, be fair.
She says, when she's challenged, she says, you have had years throwing dirt at me and accusations to prove that I actually stole, that I did something wrong. Yanukovych couldn't prove anything. Tymoshenko couldn't prove anything. Here I am, I stand before you, you're hurling these things at me, but it's time to move on. And I would say that you say that the billboards. I was struck by the fact I'd been out of the country, and I was being driven from the airport into central Kiev, and I saw the president's, army language faith. Yeah. I thought, oh my God, it's reduced to that.
It's Poroshenko.
And then I saw Tymoshenko's, which at that moment, when a lot of doubt was being cast about whether she was a pro-Putin, whether she would capitulate, etc., was very much, it said something to the effect, our security is through NATO and the EU.
I wonder if...
I thought, clear, that's the message I want, not army faith and thing, which are divisive in this country. They are important for us.
But we know Poroshenko position both on NATO and the EU, it shouldn't be, again, proclaimed on the billboards, because it's known it was...
Constitutional majority of MPs just voted for that, across all parties.
When you say faith, what does that mean for a Greek Catholic? What does it mean for a Muslim, a Jew living here?
It means
it's a divisive thing. You can say, for the Orthodox, I'm helping you to get this back. Language is a very controversial thing. We want the Ukrainian language bolstered.
Yeah, but again, it's all about interpretation. You can say it's about any language or about any faith.
On the eve of elections.
It's all about interpretation.
All the candidates playing with many of them, by the way, apart from Zelensky trying to play with the divisive things, though there is a risk that he could be a divisive candidate. This week there was another interesting case when the candidate Yuriy, former opposition bloc, had met with Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, which
together with
Viktor Medvedchuk, also a Ukrainian politician, a negotiator, a personal friend of Putin. We can see that on pictures. My question is rather general. It looks like Yuriy Boyko doesn't have much chances. Still, we have the parliamentary elections coming, so many politicians are playing into this present election in order to be kind of on the television everywhere. How about the Russian factor? I think that a lot of people in the West thought that, so whether there would be, let's say, a pro-Russian candidate in the country, does he has chances? At this stage, it looks like not really. But what are the things? Yevhen, you following?
Yeah, I'm following that for kind of very professional reasons. And again, we come to the topic of war and peace, and Russia is playing in many different ways with that, but not only from outside of Ukraine, but also from inside of Ukraine. So we've seen how they moved to original Ukrainian media platforms, how they try to basically use that as a divisive issue again. So we've seen, for example, all those billboards with candidates promising peace, and then we immediately see the escalation of the war in the East. So it's well connected, because if you increase the intensity of the war, if you escalate over there, then you can bring it back to Kiev and to many other places around Ukraine and say, if you vote for anyone but Poroshenko, the war is going to be more or less, you decide, so they are influencing the choice of Ukrainians by that. And this very meeting also was sending very, very strong signals that we are still a major stakeholders at your political process, and we still want to be the major stakeholder in the electoral process. And this is very, very symptomatic, so it was the most kind of obvious act of meddling. There were many others, more kind of less visible with the use of different, again, media, social media, other things. But this is just a kind of sending very strong political message that we are a stakeholder over there. And for example, if you remember that very program on Russian television where they've been discussing the offensive against Ukraine on a tactical level, what we are doing if Poroshenko wins.
All the time.
And that was absolutely kind of obvious act that they are really considering that they are a major stakeholder over there.
That's part of the war of nerves. I see it differently. I think Boyko and Medvedchuk's visit was almost an act of despair by a pro-Russian party that's marginalized. However, I think the underlying significance is that it was also a tacit appeal to pro-Russian voters not to go for Zelensky, not to go for Tymoshenko, but to look at the last minute at other options. But my most important question is the impotence of the president as regards this visit. Where is his reaction? You saw his reaction against Saakashvili, threw him out of the country, deprived him of citizenship, when there was this supposed allegation that Russian money was involved in backing Saakashvili. Here are two politicians that go there during wartime. The president says, yes, this isn't good. Why aren't they, being questioned? They should be in the SBU being questioned.
Gentlemen,
the president is not kind of tactical director.
He's not responsible for this. So what kind of president is he?
It's a question either we want the rule of law or we want president to do everything in a...
Short comments from Paul and Dirk, Russian Factor.
I think this was a PR stunt that helps very much Poroshenko, because he's trying to zombieize people now to tell them it's either me or Putin. Whereas I personally think that there are many candidates who definitely are not Putin. So it's in his interest, this trip.
I'm going to revise something that I said earlier on. I said that the worst outcome of this election would be if Tymoshenko won, but actually, obviously, it would be much worse if Boyko would win. That would probably lead to a federalization of Ukraine and Russian de facto control over Ukraine.
So before we go, I know that...
We haven't mentioned Akhmetov. We must. And remember, he's an ally of the president and he's an ally of Boyko. So that fits in with what you said. Where is Mr. Akhmetov these days?
I would like to totally mention something totally else, because everybody's interested abroad in the elections in Ukraine, but maybe sometimes it's not so important what's going on with the particular people. I would like to raise a question, the issue which had happened this week. A Russian court in the city of Rostov-on-Don had sentenced Ukrainian citizen Pavlo Gryb to 6 years in prison for terrorism promotion. Pavlo denies the charges, announced a hunger strike to protect the sentencing. He's 20 years old. He has a very poor physical condition. I would remind he traveled in 2017 to Belarus to meet someone he believes was a girl he met online, but family thinks he walked into a honey trap. Hromadske was the only Ukrainian media being there at the trial, so we would like to draw attention and show the short video before we have a roundup of our discussion.
Впервые мне выпадает такая возможность сказать свое слово. Останнє слово. Последнее слово.
Де я хотів нарешті цілком розповісти за все і доводити правду.
А где я хотел бы наконец сказать все, как было на самом деле.
Ніхто не мав підстав гадати, що Білорусь, наче стороння, є небезпечною насправді. Бажаю наснаги і сил випробування. Пройти випробування положень достойно всім українським патріотам, пройти з гідністю, правді і совісті. Та я вже закінчую.
Ви можете закінчити, можете закінчити. Про обвинення розказуйте.
Буду дійсно закінчувати. Тоді подякую всім, хто мене уважно слухав, хто мене і в залі підтримував. Слава Україні, слава нації, слава українській нації.
Слава Україні, слава нації, слава українській нації.
Все.
Як ти себе почуваєш?
Так,
Киевскую.
Тримайся. Все буде добре.
Віримо.
So these days, a lot of people are asking us in Ukraine about elections, but I would remind there are a lot of other important stories happening where the people's life is on stake. This is one of them as well. We just recently come back from Crimea. So on our webpage, on our social media at en.hromadske.ua, you can find way more stories to follow and be aware of that. And having very little time to finalize, we discussed a lot. Maybe I would ask from everybody to have a very short final word, bearing in mind what is the most important about elections, what is important about Ukraine, what would be your message also to the international audience which would like to understand what's going on?
I will say very quickly that I think that the far more important election that is coming up is the parliamentary elections, and hopefully that will be the trigger to get more of civil society, as we were talking about earlier on, actively involved in politics and actively involved in shaping the future of this country and change the balance away from oligarchs and the current clans.
I agree. The presidential election poses problems, but it offers new opportunities. And I think we should take advantage of those opportunities through civil society, through all sorts of pressure that is acceptable to ensure that the reconfiguration of political forces that occurs after these elections are ones that are good for this country. Most importantly, we have to find ways of restoring both public confidence. 90% of people don't have confidence in the Ukrainian government anymore, according to the Gallup poll results this week, if we are to believe them. And we have to restore the confidence of our allies, our creditors, and those who support us in the war.
Dick?
For me, I wish that Ukrainians will vote with their brain and not just with their heart, and a little bit try to make a step backwards from all the propaganda that we're getting around our ears now each day, from some of the points like this Poroshenko Putin, that I totally don't support. I hope that people will vote with their brain, and I hope that this will not create some new disruption among the society by getting too extreme in their position and in their attitude, especially the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, my conclusion would be that we are going to face absolutely very democratic and pluralistic elections, and probably it's a very, very first election in post-Soviet space where you actually cannot predict who is going to win, and this is quite phenomenal, and that gives you a very good understanding of level of political culture in Ukraine, which is improving. We are still very far from ideal, but I mean, there is no ideal anywhere. The political process is a process. You cannot achieve something and then stay there forever. Ukraine is moving something better. Something is not going well, but definitely these elections are very pivotal. And looking at the very last video stories you showed, it definitely brings us to the main issue of this election. It's a question of peace and war. And if people would be caring more much about their welfare, about other very personal things, cheaper cars and cheaper gas and more entertainment on TV, they definitely would lose. And that would definitely bring deterioration to the political culture, which we need to take care about as a part of civil society and at every level of every person engaged in this electoral process.
Thanks a lot for a brilliant discussion. That was Paul Nyland, Kiev-based writer, founder of Statement Email, Bohdan Nahailo, a British journalist, a historian, a long-time Ukraine's watcher, as well as Dirk Lustig, who is an activist based here, and Yevhen Fedchenko, founder of Stop Fake. So stay with us, follow the elections with Hromadske. We would be there live during the election evening next Sunday, and follow our social media and webpage. And there is a lot to discuss, and I really hope, and more than sure, that these debates we had here really partly showed what are the debates here in Ukraine. Thank you. Ukraine.